for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we're going live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the virtual annual town meeting of the town of Brookline for the year 2020. I'm informed by my IT staff that we have a quorum, and I call to order the meeting. I acknowledge receipt of the return of service and evidence of the proper publication and service of the warrant, and call on Dr. Slayton to lead us in the Star Spangled Banner, for which you will all be unmuted. So prepare yourselves. Is Dr. Slayton with us? Have you got him checked in? Okay, would you unmute Dr. Slayton?
I'm unmuted, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Why don't you proceed to lead us in the Star Spangled Banner?
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, to town meeting. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We have a lot of timid people in the audience, but that was great. I have a little, at this point in our proceedings, we normally hear from the town clerk's office the role of deceased town meeting members since the last annual town meeting, but the town clerk's office has not been able to compile that list this year. So we're going to do something a little different. We have three crises in this country and in our society. We have a pandemic, we have a recession, and we have systemic racism. And I'd like to have a moment of silence in memory of the victims of the pandemic and particularly the recent victims of our racism problem. And further, the moment of silence will be an appreciation for the real unsung heroes of the COVID crisis, our healthcare workers, our grocery workers, our delivery personnel, our first responders. So if you'll join me wherever you are in a moment of silence in memory and in appreciation. Thank you very much. I now call on Ben Franco, a late member of the Select Board to explain the features of the Zoom platform on which we are holding this virtual meeting. Mr. Franco?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm going to walk through some of the functionality of Zoom and tell you how to navigate around the platform. By default, your microphone will be muted and you'll be unable to unmute yourself until the support staff for this meeting gives you permission to do so. When it's your turn to speak, the moderator will call upon you. A few seconds later, you'll see a prompt on your screen asking you to unmute yourself. You may need to click OK to acknowledge this prompt. After clicking the prompt, you'll need to complete the unmuting process by clicking the Mute Unmute button at the bottom far left side of the screen. A note to town meeting couples, please be sure that you only have one of your audio devices turned on and that it's unmuted at any given time. Having only one audio output will help limit audio interference in this meeting and help others in the meeting hear the content and the conversation. Immediately to the right of the Mute Unmute button is the Start Stop Video button. This button allows you to turn your video camera on and off. If you're comfortable doing so, and if you have internet bandwidth and technology that allows you to do so, you may turn your camera on. If you choose to turn your camera on, be mindful that the moderator will be enforcing the usual prohibition on the display of political signs and oversized political badges. If you're experiencing choppy audio or video during tonight's session, we suggest that you keep your video off for the duration of the meeting. Turning your video off will limit the internet bandwidth you are uploading, thereby allowing more room for you to download audio and video of others. As a reminder, if your camera is turned on, it will broadcast everything it captures to those present in the meeting. Please be mindful of this. The participant button immediately to the right of the Start Stop Video button allows you to see the name of everybody present in the meeting. At the top of the list of those present, you'll see a number of accounts related to the running of this virtual town meeting. Below these accounts, you'll see a list of town meeting members, staff, and guests present in the meeting listed in alphabetical order by last name. Next to each name, you'll see information about who a town meeting member represents, a precinct number or the letters AL to denote at-large status, or that the person is a guest in the meeting. A guest might be a non-town meeting member presenter on a warrant article or town staff. As an example of this meeting naming convention, a town meeting member might appear as Obama Michelle P1. Immediately to the right of the participants button, you'll see a chat icon. You can access the chat feature by clicking this icon. During town meeting, you will only be able to chat with the chat monitor account. This means you will be unable to chat with other town meeting members individually or as a group. So please do not use the chat feature to try and broadcast your views on a particular article to your colleagues. During tonight's town meeting session, the chat feature should be used for two purposes. First, to get in line to address town meeting, akin to lining up at the microphone during an in-person town meeting session. Your request to speak could, for example, be to ask a question or to make a comment. If you wish to ask a question or make a comment at tonight's session, please send a message to the chat monitor account that contains, in this order, your first name, last name, the letter P and the applicable precinct number, or the letters AL, and the word question or comment. For example, Hillary Clinton, AL, comment. The second reason you would use the chat feature this evening is to raise a procedural point. For example, to call the question or to raise a point of order. If you're making a procedural motion during tonight's session, please send a message to the chat monitor account that reads first name, last name, P and the applicable precinct number or the letters AL, and the type of motion you wish to make. For example, Michael Dukakis, P1, point of order. As the chat monitor account receives requests from town meeting members to ask a question or make a comment, I will do my best to post a running list of the queue. To see that queue, please click the chat icon. Town meeting members will immediately be called upon if they have a point of order or are calling the question. As a reminder, amendments to warrant articles will not be accepted via the chat feature. Finally, Please do not use the chat feature to submit requests for technical assistance or to make comments about warrant articles or to engage in side conversations with the chat monitor. If you require technical assistance during tonight's session, you may contact ithelp@bu.edu or call 617-353-4357 and identify yourself as a Brookline Town Meeting member. At the bottom right of your screen, you'll see a closed caption button labeled CC. Tonight's meeting will be closed captioned to make the proceedings more accessible to town meeting members, guests, staff, and members of the public watching on BIG. Anyone who would benefit from or enjoy seeing the closed captioning is invited to utilize this functionality. To see the captions, click on the CC button and select Show Subtitles. To turn the captions off, all you need to do is click the CC button once again. There is no requirement that you use or do not use the caption feature. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
And thank you, Mr. Franco. I have some announcements before we commence our business. First, I have a number of people I need to thank. Mounting this production, that is a virtual remote town meeting, involves a great many issues and difficulties that need to be overcome. In early March, I appointed a committee to deal with these issues and to develop our format for town meeting. Without the work of this committee, we wouldn't be here this evening. The committee consists of Dennis Doughty, Ben Franco, Kareem Matin, Tracy Schroeder, Mark Levy, and Michael Sandman, who somehow managed to both chair this committee and chair the advisory committee at the same time, a superhuman task. Special thanks to Tracy Schroeder and her colleagues at the BU IT department who are assisting us this evening and have assisted us throughout this process. Again, without their help, we probably would not be holding this meeting this evening. Quick review of what I want to emphasize some things that what Mr. Franco said about use of the chat line. The chat line is not a ordinary chat line. It is to be used only to address questions, comments, or procedural points to the chat monitor. Mr. Burstein. Point of order is permitted to interrupt the speaker, and that's what Mr. Burstein's about to do.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Michael Burstein, Precinct 12. During the past 17 or so minutes, there have been a few people emailing the TMMA list saying they haven't been able to get into the meeting. I've shared the help desk number with them, but I just want you to be aware that there are some people still having trouble. And if I'm more than happy to communicate with them any other information that would be helpful, but I'm concerned about the, I guess, the question of privilege of their inability to get into the meeting.
Well, they can do one of two things. If they can call or email the BU help desk at the number and email address that was included in the instructions for registration this evening. If they still cannot get into the meeting after working with the BU help desk, there is a phone number in that a conference line. And as a last resort, you can use the conference line and you'll be in a separate category and your participation will not be as rich as it is electronically, but you will be able to hear what's going on and to cast a vote when it comes time to vote. Which brings me to I think I've covered the chat line. It's to be used only to communicate, as Mr. Burstein did with the chat monitor, who is, again, Mr. Franco wearing several hats this evening. When whenever you start to speak, please observe our usual protocol, which is to announce your name and precinct, as Mr. Burstein did. And for those of you who have signed up to speak and present, in the absence of special dispensation from me, from the moderator, your time limit is 3 minutes, and I will be keeping track of that at the podium. Now, before we have a couple of votes as a preliminary matter, and before we get to them, I want to describe the voting process, which is obviously the whole reason we're here. In the first place, I want to point out that the Zoom platform on which we're operating does not enable us to differentiate between voting town meeting members and non-voting participants in the meeting. And the manifestation of that will be that when it comes time to cast a ballot, all participants who have been allowed into the meeting will have a ballot drop onto their screens. And I will repeat this a number of times during the course of this meeting, but if you are not a town meeting member, please do not fill out and submit a ballot. If you do so, I will do my best to shame you when we discover what you've done at the next session, and I don't think you want that to happen. So if you're not a voter, please do not submit a ballot. Those of you who are voters will have a ballot, and the ballot will have a brief description of the motion before you. and you can click on, as you do on your handheld device, either yes, no, or abstain. And then you click on submit once you're sure that you have clicked on the correct voting response. It's important that you make sure that you have your wishes properly recorded, because once you submit your ballot, you cannot retrieve it. It will be irretrievable, and submit is a final action. So you can't, as we can in our in-person town meetings, change your mind a number of times. You can't change your mind once in this system. Unfortunately, we have no means of replicating the voting tally, the running tally that we have at town meeting, either the tally of the votes or the ability for you to make sure that your votes have been properly recorded. That's something that we're going to, one of the downsides to using this system and a virtual town meeting is that you will not be able to check and make sure that your votes have been properly recorded until probably the next afternoon, because it will take several hours to compile the results of the votes and to post them on the town website. They'll be posted in the usual fashion in the town meeting section of the website, and you will please check and make sure that your vote has been properly recorded. If it has not been, you contact me and the town clerk and make a correction, and we will take it on faith and record the corrected vote total, as I do in an in-person town meeting. So with that in mind, we have a motion before us, and the motion is a motion to approve the conduct of a virtual town meeting. And the reason this self-evident motion is before you is because the statute which validates our proceedings requires it. So when we're ready for a vote, the voting monitor on my right will inform me that he's ready to start the voting period, and you will have a countdown on your screen from 45 seconds to 0. And that will be the voting period during which you will cast your vote in the manner that I described a little while ago. So the motion before you is to approve the conduct of a virtual town meeting. Whenever you're ready. Okay, the voting period has started. I will cover that. And I don't have anything on my screen, so you're going to have to tell me when the voting period is over. Time has elapsed. Could I have the count, please? Well, at least one abstention.
I'm sorry, my apologies, one abstention.
That's an extraordinary turnout. We have 90% of the town meeting members present, assuming that none of those 224 votes was a non-voter. That was not a recorded vote. Let me say a word about recorded votes. All votes of any significance that we take at this town meeting will be recorded votes. I will declare that on my own motion. If I don't declare a recorded vote, I'll try to remember to do that each time we have a recorded vote, and I'll cover the recorded votes that we'll have in just a moment. You can always ask the chat monitor for a procedural point and make your call for a recorded vote. I will not go through the process of asking for 35 town meeting members to approve a recorded vote, because we have never had an occasion in 8 years of using electronic voting in which a request for a recorded vote has not been supported by town meeting. In any of Ms. Nobrega. So you may have to click on your little microphone to be able to be heard. We can unmute you have to unmute yourself. N for North, Obrega.
Hi, what am I being called for? I'm sorry.
You have a point of order, do you?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Can you just clarify? Sorry, I have kids here. Will we know tomorrow if our vote was recorded correctly and what the final tally was?
Well, I will read out a tally when we finish the vote, and that will just be the tally that we've initially taken. You will check your votes and make sure they've been properly recorded. And as I said, tell me if they have not been, and if the tally needs correcting, I'll correct it at the next session.
But how will we know if our vote has been properly recorded?
You'll have to look on the website when the votes are posted the next day.
Okay, so they will be posted tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay.
Mid-afternoon. And please, for the rest of you, don't forget to announce your name and precinct when you're called on. All right. So I will have recorded votes on everything you can think of that's going to come before you that's of any importance at this town meeting. All of the budget bonding votes, all of the budget amendments, all of the Newbury votes, and probably the Oak Street vote if we deal with Article 16. Well, the points of order are coming thick and fast. Ms. Fisher?
Hi, this is Shira Fisher, Precinct 11. I just wanted to request that every vote be recorded since they're automatically electronic anyway, and that way we'd have a record instead of making us ask before each vote and possibly missing the time.
Well, I'm going to require that you make that motion every time I call for a vote that's not recorded, because we have a number of very unimportant votes like the one we just took that for which I do not believe that we need to go through the recording process and clutter up the town clerk's records and the town website for each and every vote, such as a vote to adjourn to the next evening. So if I don't announce a recorded vote, you feel free to make that motion. I want to cover the process that we'll be going through and the articles that we'll be covering. We will next have a motion to postpone certain articles, which will eliminate from our consideration a large number of the articles on the warrant, and we'll get to that in a moment. Tonight, we will deal with the agenda reduction that I just mentioned. We will deal with 3 routine articles that we have on the warrant every year, which almost always pass unanimously, such things as payment of bills of a prior year and the ability of the town treasurer to enter into compensating balance arrangements. We will then proceed, having first determined that town meeting goes along with my proposal to defer the budget until Wednesday night. We will proceed with the Newbury articles after we finish the routine articles this evening. Wednesday night will be virtually all devoted to the budget, and Thursday and Monday, the last 2 nights, will be devoted to probably Articles 16, 18, 19, and 25. And if there's any leftover budget business, we'll deal with that on Thursday. So we next have 2 motions. One is a proposal to defer Article 8, the budget article, until tomorrow night. It requires the approval of town meeting, and the purpose of this is to provide you with an extra 24 hours to consider and deal with the budget, which you haven't even seen in its final form and won't until tomorrow morning, unfortunately, because of the abbreviated schedule during which our town fathers have had to deal with the next fiscal year's budget. So this is a motion to defer Article 8 until the next session Wednesday evening.
Mr. Moderator, point of order from Marty Rosenthal.
Mr. Rosenthal, another point of order.
The select board deferred almost all of their discussion on the very complicated amendments until tomorrow night. I think what they did was recess their meeting. So we will have nothing from them before tomorrow night. So I wonder if you would consider it in order to skip the budget tomorrow night and go to the other items, which are all the information has been presented to us.
Well, I was not aware that the select board had not done what I thought it was going to do this evening. I'm disappointed because it would have been good to have a couple of nights to deal with the budget, but I will certainly consider that request when I find out what the advisory committee and select board actually did this evening at their meetings before this session. Thank you for bringing that up.
Mr. Moderator, can't we deal with that now, because it would make a difference? I'm not sure what you're proposing, to wait until tomorrow night to decide that.
Well, let me hear from the chairman of the board of the select board as to what actually happened and what they did with respect to the budget. So, Mr. Green.
Bernard, you.
Allowed to unmute. Okay. We started discussion of the budget amendments, voted with respect to some of the advisory committee amendments, but when we got to the conditions of appropriation submitted by Mr. Gordon and Rosenthal, we're at the point, we're at the almost at the point where we had to go into town meeting. So we recessed until tomorrow to give those items, including the budget amendment that relates to police funding, give that sufficient time to be discussed competently.
So you did not, as I understand it, discuss and pass on the the agreement that was reached tentatively at a reconciliation session this morning with respect to the reduction of the police budget as part of the advisory committee motion. Is that correct?
That's correct. I don't think that we had the advisory committee's final position on that by the time that we ran out of time.
Then I will take a motion to defer the budget article, Article 8, until the first thing Thursday evening. And that will be the motion before you. Yes. Yep.
Mr. Moderator, Representative Vitolo has a point of order.
Yeah. Representative Vitolo.
Tommy Vitolo, town meeting member at large. Mr. Moderator, I recall your initial strategy for having the budget on Wednesday was that we would have a full day of, I think you described them as non-controversial articles after that, so that if any of our votes were misrecorded on budget items, which in fact are critical, controversial, and complicated, that we would have the opportunity the following day to correct any errors. If we do the budget on Thursday and conclude our business Thursday evening, will we have the opportunity to correct any erroneous votes on the budget amendments that actually have significant consequence?
The answer is yes, because I will not permit the meeting to be dissolved until you have had an adequate opportunity to review the budget votes that have been cast. And if the only business we have remaining for next Tuesday is to dissolve the meeting, that's what we'll do next Tuesday. But you will have the period between Thursday and Tuesday to check the votes that you've cast in the budget debate on Thursday. I will make sure that that happens. So the motion before you, getting back to business here, the motion before you is to defer Article 8 until the first thing Thursday evening. And whenever you're ready to start the voting period. Okay. We started it?
Started.
Yep, the voting period has started. Click yes if you agree with the deferral of the budget until Thursday. Click no if you disagree, and abstain if you're abstaining.
Fifteen seconds remaining.
Are we muted?
Time's elapsed.
Time has elapsed. May I have the count, please?
Pretty clever, huh? Quick.
Would you mute Mr. Rosenthal, please? The motion carries by a vote of 195 in favor, 27 opposed, and 5 abstentions. We now turn to a motion on the purple supplement that you will have received with your supplemental mailing. It is a motion on page 1 of the purple supplement, moved by Mr. Green, seconded by Mr. Sandman, to support the deferral of warrant articles 1, 2, 7, 17, 20 to 24, and 26 to 42 until the next scheduled town meeting, with the understanding that the select board intends to insert each of the deferred articles into the warrant of the next scheduled town meeting. And any article that was previously submitted by petition will be inserted by the select board into that warrant without the requirement to resubmit a new petition. That's moved by Mr. Green, seconded by Mr. Sandman.
Mr. Moderator, David Mark Goldstein has a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Mark Goldstein. David Mark.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. I'm sorry to interrupt. I had a question about whether the new town meeting members had already been sworn in, because we're already voting. I didn't know if you had done that before the meeting, or do you need to do it before we take any more votes?
It's a perfectly good point. It was made without your identifying yourself, but I will forgive you this time.
My apologies.
I thought I had publicized this to town meeting. The process of swearing in new town meeting members is a very nice and quaint tradition in Brookline, but it is not a legal requirement. And since there was no way effectively to be able to swear in 80 or so newly elected town meeting members in a virtual town meeting, we're omitting that step. Don't worry. Once you were duly elected, you were qualified to act and as a town meeting member and to vote as one. So getting back to the motion before you, there is an amendment that's been offered by Mr. Richmond, seconded by Ms. Brown, to add Article 16, which relates to the sale of the Oak Street property, to the list of articles being postponed from this meeting until the next one. And I will call on Mr. Green after just explaining briefly the reason for this deferral, and is essentially that we could not have realistically expected to complete a 42 article warrant in our first experience with a virtual town meeting. And we did the same that virtually every other New England, Massachusetts town that's conducting an annual town meeting has done, and that is to reduce the number of articles that are actually before you at the virtual town meeting or at one of the open town meetings that have been held out in the football fields and parking lots, to a minimum, that is, those believed to be essential to deal with in the view of the select board and the advisory committee. So that's the reason for the reduction, and I call on Mr. Green to comment both on the selectman's motion and on the motion by Mr. Richmond to postpone Article 16. Mr. Green?
Okay, on June 11th, we voted as a body to defer the listed warrant articles until a future town meeting. Not necessarily the November town meeting, I might add, but a future town meeting. No discussion as to having a town meeting earlier than November, but that is a possibility, given that November will be a pretty crowded town meeting otherwise. The issue of Oak Street and whether we should not defer that warrant article, Article 16, warrant Article 16, did come up and was discussed by the select board. And the vote was 3 in favor of not deferring Oak Street and 2 against not deferring Oak Street. So the select board's position is to not defer the Oak Street article.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to call to your attention that your own motion says that these postponements are taking place to the next scheduled town meeting. We all recognize that with respect to select board initiated motions, articles, that you have the right within the select board's powers to defer those or not put them on the warrant at all. But I would expect that, consistent with the terms of this vote, petition articles on the current warrant would be included in the warrant for the very next town meeting, whether we hold it in September or November.
Mr. Moderator, Amanda Zimmerman has a question.
Ms. Zimmerman?
Hi, yes, Amanda Zimmerman, Precinct 8. I'm wondering what changed that added Article 16 back to the agenda when it wasn't on the original list, because it seems to me that some of the other boards and commissions might have actually had hearings on this if they knew ahead of time that we were considering it.
Well, I think you'll hear from Mr. Sandman as to why the advisory committee, which voted overwhelmingly to bring this article back to this town meeting instead of postponing it, did so.
May I add, Mr. Moderator? The select board was very clear that the article only gives the select board authority to sell the property. It does not require us to sell the property. And that was a major factor, I think, in the vote within our body.
Thank you. So call on Mr. Richmond on the issue of postponing Article 16.
Good evening. Clint Richmond, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Well, I wasn't, given the extensive new budget amendments, I'm not sure we even have time for warrant Article 16 any longer. But aside from that, most importantly, the process for warrant Article 16 has been very confused and rushed. The warrant closed in March, and we were informed a few days later with COVID that warrant Article 16 was going to be deferred. Then, as I perceive it, suddenly, less than 2 weeks ago, on June 10th, this article had its first hearing. Maybe I was confused, but this AC hearing was being held because the article was presented as it was going to be moved from the floor, as you can see in the orange supplement, number 1 on Article 16. I thought we would be voting on it separately, and now it is part of the main motion, which surprised me and is why I'm bringing this amendment when I wasn't really planning to. The only other town committee to hear this was the select board last Tuesday. For example, the Housing Advisory Board should have been formally consulted, but it was not because alternative uses were not considered. Other uses could also include future parkland or other municipal departments, which would have involved other town bodies and civic associations. The financial analysis is incomplete, so the town meeting does not have adequate information to make an informed decision. The significant revenue from moderate income affordable housing was not considered. The alternative to leasing the property to a real estate firm instead of selling it was not considered, even though we saw this had the higher return for the former Webster Street parking lot in Coolidge Corner, now the hotel. For these reasons, we should defer this warrant article until the next town meeting, as was originally proposed and was expected up until just 2 weeks ago. So regardless of your opinion on this warrant article, please vote yes on this amendment so that we can enjoy a fuller discussion in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Sandman, Chair of the Advisory Committee and Town Meeting Member Precinct 3, speaking for the Advisory Committee. The criterion for separating the articles we wanted to consider at this virtual town meeting and those that could wait was whether an article was time sensitive. Thus, the budget has to be passed by June 30th. The Newbury agreements call for a decision by a certain time, and there are some technical reasons why the few remaining articles needed to be dealt with. The amendment before you right now is not about whether to authorize the select board to sell Oak Street. If you consider that, you'll be making that decision later on. It's about whether to vote on whether to be able to consider Article 16 or not, or to postpone it until November. Last November, we had a very thorough discussion of Article 16. All of the various boards had an opportunity to review it and so forth. And it was defeated by a narrow margin. It's something that should be fresh in the minds of most of the people here, or at least those of us who are policy wonks, and certainly the boards will have had an opportunity to do a thorough job looking at it in November. Article 16 doesn't look like it's time sensitive, but surprisingly, COVID-19 has not cooled the real estate market. The inventory is low, there are still buyers, and we are faced with some pretty significant budget issues, as you'll hear Thursday night. Wouldn't it be a good idea to consider giving the select board the authority to sell Oak Street townhouses now in this strong market? We acquired those properties in anticipation of building a new Baldwin school. That seems rather unlikely now. What else are we going to do with them? And should we not give the select board the opportunity, not the requirement, to consider selling them? The idea that we should spend $4.7 million to acquire 2/10 of an acre for some other purpose, like open space, and then tear down houses that could be paying real estate taxes seems very strange. But I'm not here to debate the merits of holding or selling the property. I'm only here to recommend that we vote at this town meeting on whether to give the select board authorization to sell. It seems timely given the real estate market. Perhaps it's even time sensitive given that market and given our own budget, and therefore it belongs in this town meeting, not in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion of Mr. Richmond to include Article 16 in the articles being postponed pursuant to the select board's vote.
Mr. Moderator, Harry Friedman has a point of order, excuse me.
Mr. Friedman.
Mr. Moderator, Harry Friedman, Precinct 12. It's a comment on two other reasons why advisory voted to put this on. The first reason is that we postponed many things to November with the understanding that November would probably be a live town meeting back at the high school, and that we wanted to limit the number of things we had to do on the virtual town meeting. I think many of us think that November will be no different from June, and that will be at a virtual town meeting in November too. The second reason is that we also thought that at the current June town meeting, that the high school project would be moved. That being moved, as I understand it, and therefore that left more room to discuss, as Mr. Salmon said, the somewhat time-sensitive
Okay, thank you, Mr. Friedman.
Mr. Moderator, Clint Richmond has requested a recorded vote.
There's been a request for a recorded vote, and we will have one on Mr. Richmond's motion to include Article 16 among those articles being postponed until the next town meeting. This will be a recorded vote. And I think we're ready for the vote whenever you.
It's been launched.
Okay, the voting period has started. Click yes if you approve Mr. Richmond's motion to postpone the Article 16, no if you disapprove, and abstain if you abstain, and then submit.
It's been elapsed.
Thank you. The voting period has elapsed. May I have the count, please?
79 yes, 138 no, 12 abstentions.
That motion fails by a vote of 79 in favor, 138 opposed, and 12 abstentions. On the main motion on the purple supplement to support the deferral of warrant articles 1, 2, 7, 17, 20 to 24, and 26 to 42 until the next scheduled town meeting, etc. We're ready for a vote.
It's been launched.
Okay, the voting period has started. This is not a recorded vote. Has anyone called in, by the way? List.
Voting is elapsed.
The voting period is over. May I have a count, please? Motion carries by a vote of 223 in favor, 6 opposed, and 6 abstentions. That's about 94% of the total voting population here. It's quite extraordinary. We turn now to Articles 3 through 6. We're going to have a single, these are routine administrative articles, and we're going to have a short presentation by the Select Board and the Advisory Committee, and I have no one else signed up to speak. So the motions before us for this single debate are under Article 3. The motion is on page 3-1 to permit the treasurer to enter into compensating balance arrangements. All of these motions are made by Mr. Green and seconded by Mr. Sandman. Article 4 on the blue supplement is to close out certain accounts, and there are no accounts that are being closed out. So the motion is for no action under Article 4. Article 5, the motion is on page 5-1, favorable action to pay a bill owed to Simmons College in the amount of $51,000, a bill of a prior year. This requires a 3/4 vote, and I feel quite certain that we will have at least 3/4 of the voters in favor of all of these articles. And
Mr. Moderator, Paula Friedman has a point of order.
Well, I'll take your point of order in just a second. Article 6, the motion is on page 6-2. So favorable action for property tax exemptions as set forth on page 6-2. Those are the 4 motions before you on which the Select Board and Advisory Committee will speak. Dr. Friedman?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just would like to ask if, since in this format, we have to make a decision and can change our minds once we have voted, if the moderator would consider limiting the time available to 30 seconds rather than 45.
I'm sorry, I was a little preoccupied. What is your proposal? To reduce the voting time to 30 seconds? I would prefer to keep it at 45 seconds for this session. I'll consider reducing it for the next session. It does seem like a long time when the voting is, submitting these ballots is fairly simple. That's really not a point of order. I mean, I've allowed you to label these points as points of order, but it's really a comment more than, certainly not an official point of order. So I call on Ms. Heller of the Select Board to tell us about these 4 articles that are grouped together for this purpose. And please, a number of you have neglected to announce your name and precinct. Once again, please remember to start your remarks with your name and precinct or your status as an at-large member.
Thank you, Moderator Gadsby. Can you see me and hear me?
I can certainly hear you.
Okay, well, that's good enough. This is Nancy Heller for unanimous board of Select Board. Article 3, compensating balance agreements. Those are agreements that authorize our treasurer to enter into an agreement with the bank for maintaining a specified amount of deposits in exchange for a reduction or elimination of fees. And town meeting has approved these compensating balance agreements for more than 30 years to our benefit. And the Select Board voted unanimously to continue this practice. And we urge you to do the same. Article 4, closeout of accounts. As Mr. Gadsby said, it's an informational article required by our bylaws. There weren't any, so the Select Board has voted no action unanimously. Article 5, unpaid bills. Another annual warrant article to resolve any outstanding unpaid bills from previous fiscal years, as state law precludes paying bills from a prior fiscal year without specific approval of town meeting. And there is an unpaid bill for $51,250 owed by the school department for services provided by interns from Simmons College. Now, the school department has acknowledged that there was a billing issue, or they say that they have fixed it, and it would not happen going forward. But there was also a problem with Simmons, which is that they neglected to bill us after the first time. So the bill is deemed, and the school department has researched this. It is deemed to be a legal obligation of the town. We did receive the services, and we have not yet paid for them. Therefore, please join the unanimous Select Board in voting favorable action on the motion on page 5.1 of the combined reports. And finally, the property tax exemptions, Article 6. We've approved these since fiscal year 1989, and they're exemptions for a certain group of vulnerable residents, according to the charter on page 6.1. Estimated cost is $55,325 and funded by the tax abatement overlay reserve account. The Board of Assessors has recommended 100% increases, and understand that these are modest increases in the exempt amount from the prior year. The Select Board unanimously urges favorable action and hopes town meeting will do the same. The motion is at the top of page 6.2 in the combined reports. Thank you.
Thank
The
you.
moderator, Stanley Spiegel, has a point of order.
Mr. Spiegel?
I'm point of order on the vote required for an unpaid bill at an annual town meeting, I believe is 4/5, not 3/4.
I think you're absolutely right.
9/10 at a 4/5 at an annual. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Yes, next time you speak, please tell us who you are and what your precinct is. Thank you. Mr. Dowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dennis Dowdy, Town Meeting Member Precinct 3, speaking for the Advisory Committee. For Article 3, given that compensating balance agreements are commonplace and we have routinely engaged in them for longer than almost anyone here can remember, you might be wondering why we vote on this every year. And the answer is we have to. It's state law. And so the Advisory Committee unanimously recommends favorable action. On Article 4, the Advisory Committee recommends no action since there is no action to be taken. On Article 5, as you heard, these charges in question do represent legitimate expenses of $51,250 incurred by the public schools of Brookline in fiscal years 17 and 18. And the school department has identified funding sources which in theory could be used to cover the expense, except for the detail that leftover bills from prior fiscal years must come to town meeting and be paid from the current year's operating budget. Thus, we must resort to some accounting wizardry. We vote yes on Article 5, the town pays the bills, the school department closes out the identified encumbrances at year end, and the associated funds flow into free cash in what amounts in effect to a reimbursement. Needless to say, the Advisory Committee was concerned about the process, or more accurately, the lack of process that allowed the bills to go unpaid in the first place, but was satisfied that appropriate controls have been put in place to prevent this situation from recurring. And by a vote of 23-0-1, which was not reported accurately in the combined reports, recommends favorable action on Article 5. On Article 6, the Advisory Committee supports the property tax exemption increases and unanimously recommends favorable action. Thank you.
Thank you. We're taking a single vote.
Mr. Moderator, Shayna Gorfin has a question of privilege.
Ms. Gorfin?
There we go. Hi, Shauna Giora-Gorfine, Precinct 11. Mr. Moderator, at the beginning of this meeting or earlier in the meeting, my colleague, Ms. Fisher, asked that we have all votes be recorded. And you said that you would entertain individual motions for recorded votes for those votes that you had not already determined to be controversial and therefore recorded. On the immediately prior vote, you did not announce that that one was not going to be recorded until after the voting period had begun. So I respectfully request that we have all votes be recorded except for motions to adjourn and a motion to dissolve, or that we be given an adequate warning before the voting period begins so that anyone who wishes to have a recorded vote may so move.
That's a fair point. And I will not record the vote for Articles 3 through 6 unless somebody wants it recorded.
Mr. Moderator, a motion has been made.
Okay, I'm sorry. The sense of your comment was to have recorded votes for everything except motions to adjourn or dissolve, and I will go along with that despite my reservations.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
So this is a recorded vote on the 4 motions, page 3-1, page 4 of Article 4, no action, page 5-1 and 6-2. Whenever you're, and this is a recorded vote. Yes, all votes are recorded.
Are you okay? No, he's just gonna.
Have we started?
Yes, we started.
Okay, the voting period has started.
He's just gonna. Twenty seconds remaining.
And the voting period is terminated. May I have the count, please? Motions, all of those motions carry, including the 4/5 vote required for Article 5 by a vote of 224 in favor, 1 opposed, and 4 abstentions. And I'm sorry, I was not aware that we had 4 town meeting members on conference phone. So I'm going to call on, since this is a recorded vote, I'm going to ask that each one of you provide me with your vote both on the Richmond amendment of article, of the postponement article, if you can remember how you wanted to vote, and on Articles 3 through 6. So I will call on you. You will be unmuted, and go ahead and tell me what your votes are on those 2 motions. Mr. Electris?
I did. Hi, can you hear me? This is Christy Electris. Sorry, precinct 7. I'm also online, so I voted online, but my audio is not, my internet's not very good, so I'm on the phone as a backup.
Okay, well, then I won't call on you from now on if you're able to vote online.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones? Okay, Mr. Jones is no longer participating in the meeting. Ms. McNally?
Rita McNally, Precinct 2, yes and yes.
Thank you. Ms. Senecal?
No and yes. No
sorry?
and yes.
No.
No
and yes.
on the Richmond amendment.
Yep.
Yes on all these other votes.
Thank you very much. So the final count on the Richmond amendment is 80 in favor, 139 opposed, and 12 abstentions. And on the Articles 3 through 6, the final count is 225 in favor. I'm sorry, 226 in favor, 1 opposed, and 4 abstentions. We now turn to Articles 9 through 15. These are the so-called Newbury College articles. And I will point out the location of the votes and the way we're going to go about debating these articles. First, the first 4 votes, 9 through 12, all of which are moved by Mr. Sandman, seconded by Mr. Green, will be voted on as a block because they're interrelated, and it's pretty much of an all or nothing proposition, as you will hear during the presentations concerning these articles. The motion on on Article 9 is on pages 9-62 to 9-71. The motion on Article 10 is on pages 10-14 to 10-16. The motion under Article 11 is on pages 11-75 to 11-81. And Article 12 is on pages 12-2 to 12-3. I'm not going to attempt to describe these other than that the Article 9 involves a zoning change. Article 10 involves a restricted covenant. Article 11 involves the memorandum of agreement that's been entered into with Welltower. And Article 12 is the grant of an easement. If these motions pass, we will then proceed to Article 13. I'm sorry, if they do not pass, that will conclude our proceedings under the Newbury articles, and we'll try to figure out what else to do with our time here. If they succeed and they require a 2/3 vote, then we will proceed to Article 13, which is moved by Mr. Green, seconded by Ms. Heller. It is found on, the motion is found on page 13-1 through 13-4. And if you'll turn to 13-1, I need to convert the article to a motion by striking the words "to see if the substituting voted that the town amend." So it reads, voted that the town amend the zoning bylaw and zoning map as follows. This is an article that has to do with where the funding for affordable housing is going to be expended, as you will hear in great detail because we have a number of people signed up on both sides of that one. Article 14 is on page 14-6 to 14-7. Same change at the beginning of the article to convert it to a vote. So we voted that the town amend the zoning bylaw. And in each case, by the way, you'd delete the words or act on anything relative thereto at the end of the article. So Article 14 is a zoning change to the west side of Fisher Avenue, and Article 15 is a proposal for the town to acquire the former Newbury College property on the west side of Fisher Avenue, and it's moved by Mr. Sandman, seconded by Mr. Green. Motion is on page 15-14 through 17. We will have a single debate on all of these motions, and people who have signed up to speak will make it clear what they're addressing and their position, and will obviously explain that position. We will start out with a 40-minute presentation by the proponents of this entire project, including Articles 9 through 15. And we'll hear from Mr. Wyszynski, Mr. Blood, Ms. Heller, and Mr. Keynes, after which we will have two speakers opposing not the project itself, but opposing the town's purchase under Article 15. And then we will have a series of pro and con speakers on Article 13, which has to do with the affordable housing element in this project, and then proceed to alternate pro and con speakers, mostly pro for the rest of the presentation. We will break at some point in the proceedings when I believe my sense is that the issues have been adequately aired and both sides have been adequately presented. We will break for questions and answers. And during that period, it will be important that you communicate with the chat monitor to sign up to be recognized. It's the same as if you were walking to a microphone in the auditorium in an in-person meeting. And I will take you in the order in which you have signed up to be recognized. So I call on Mr. Wyszynski to head up the proponent's explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Neil Wyszynski, town meeting member, Precinct 5 for unanimous Newbury Zoning Committee, the petitioner. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. When Newbury College closed, town meeting recognized that the campus presented an opportunity to acquire needed space for the town. The town tried, but was not the successful bidder. Welltower Inc. was, and they immediately approached the town with a different type of opportunity. an opportunity for a green senior living community, which would provide needed independent, assisted living, and memory care services, an opportunity for context-sensitive development, which will return a valuable parcel to the tax rolls permanently, which will demand few town services, and which has garnered broad community support. And if we say yes to the well tower development, we'll have two more opportunities. We'll be able to choose which affordable housing proposal we prefer. And lastly, the town will have an opportunity to acquire the west side of the former Newberry College campus, which includes the move-in ready academic center. These three opportunities translate into the three decisions depicted in the graphic. Next slide, please. To realize these opportunities, we must first say yes to the articles in Decision 1, that is Articles 9 through 12, which will be voted on as a package, as you've heard. And then if town meeting says yes to Decision 1, we advance to Decision 2, which is town meeting's selection of the affordable housing option, which is embodied in Article 13. Here we have an option to develop 18 affordable units across the street from the well tower development at 125 Holland Road, or make a cash contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust earmarked for a redevelopment of the Brookline Housing Authority Colonel Floyd Apartments off Marion Street in Coolidge Corner. And then Decision 3, which is, do we want to give the town's voters the option to vote on the purchase of the part of the campus on the west side of Fisher Avenue adjacent to the beautiful new Fisher Hill Reservoir Park? I'll be presenting the warrant articles which make up Decision 1, the well tower package. Roger Blood will explain Decision 2, the affordable housing options, and then Select Board member Nancy Heller will present Decision 3, the West Campus articles. Ms. Heller will then present the Select Board recommendation, followed by Steve Kanes, who will present the advisory committee position. Next slide, please. So now let's turn to Decision 1, the articles which comprise the well tower project. Next slide, please. Soon after Welltower approached the town, soon after Welltower purchased the property, they approached the town with their proposal to build a senior living community and sell the West Campus to the town. The Select Board formed the Newberry Zoning Committee to work through the proposal and manage the public process. This 13-member committee, chaired by Select Board member Heller, consisted of neighbors, town meeting members, real estate and architecture professionals, and 2 Select Board members. The committee held 10 public meetings, plus the architecture subcommittee held 7 public meetings in an attempt to engage the community and receive public feedback. Next slide, please. And out of the public process came the 3-decision package of 7 warrant articles before you. Next slide, please. So what are we talking about? The map on the screen depicts the layout of the Newberry campus. The east side in blue is the proposed site of the well tower development. Next slide, please. Well Tower is proposing a senior living community with 160 market rate rental units. About 80 will be independent living, 40 will be assisted living, and then 40 will be memory care units. In total, the development will be 193,000 square feet, which is about double the existing buildings on the site. This translates to a floor to area ratio of 1.15. There'll be 98 parking spaces, 43 of which will be underground. Next slide, please. After the site is developed, the community will be operated by Balfour Senior Living, which operates a number of other communities like this around the country. They are based in the Denver area. This will be their first such community in the Boston metro area. The zoning for the site needs to be changed to allow for this type of development on Fisher Hill. Current zoning allows for large and mid-sized suburban-style single-family house lots. Newberry College, as a not-for-profit educational institution, was able to develop and operate an otherwise non-conforming institutional use, which is allowed by the Dover Amendment, which allows non-conforming uses and massing for religious and non-profit educational use. Next slide, please. Here is the proposed site plan. Note that the Mitten House, the most distinctive and important building on the campus, is going to be preserved. This was an important priority of the Newbury Committee throughout. Other elements of the site plan include generous setbacks from Fisher Avenue. All vehicular access to the site will be from Fisher Avenue with no access from Holland Road. Reduction of and better placement of parking as compared to the existing site plan, plus pulling back and screening of the parking from the neighbors as shown at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. This is a representation of the view from the north side of the site from Holland Road. The redevelopment encompasses Mitten House, which you see on the right side. Note that this is not a final representation of the architecture, which must still go through the design review and preservation commission processes. What will not change is the general location of the buildings, the massing, and the heights. Next slide, please. This is a view looking east from Fisher Avenue. On the left is the other side of Mitten House from the prior view. This will be the main entrance to the complex, and it shows a pedestrian walkway extending from the Mitten House to the other buildings. Next slide, please. This drawing is from a bit further south on Fisher Avenue. Mitten House is barely visible all the way on the left. Again, I remind you that the design details still need to be worked out through the upcoming design review process, which will begin shortly if the package is approved. Next slide, please. Welltower is committing to a number of sustainability strategies, which, when combined, should make this, if not the greenest, certainly among the greenest developments ever undertaken in Brookline. Highlights include designing to be LEED Gold certifiable, passive house strategies to reduce energy demand, and compliance with the no fossil fuel bylaw even before it goes into effect. But here I'll note that there may be an exemption request for a pool heater. Next slide, please. Aspects of the project which have been reviewed and endorsed by the Newbury Zoning Committee include the Senior Living Community Program, insistence on the adaptive reuse of the Mitten House, traffic, parking, and sustainability issues, plus other community benefits. Also, with the assistance of the town's financial consultant, Pan McKinney, the committee reviewed how large the project needed to be financially viable and how much room there was to press for a better deal. I note that Ms. McKinney is available to answer questions from the virtual town meeting floor should the moderator request. Next slide, please. This development will be subject to a tax certainty agreement which will run with the land. This means that if the project is ever sold to a tax-exempt entity, the town will still get an equivalent amount as a payment in lieu of taxes. A conservative estimate of the real estate taxes produced by the development at so-called stabilization will be at least $800,000 per year, which will be subject to Proposition 2.5 escalation. This translates to a net present value of $40 to $60 million over the life of the tax certainty agreement. Additionally, we expect a building permit fee of about $1.5 million. Next slide, please. So, in order to realize all these benefits, we need to say yes to Articles 9 through 12. If we say no, we'll not achieve the tax growth and negotiated benefits of the project. If we say no, there's no affordable housing option. And if we say no, we lose the opportunity for the voters to consider buying the West Campus. If we say no, Welltower has stated that they'll be selling the campus to another buyer or buyers, and we don't know what'll happen. And the notion that by saying no means we can buy the property for $34 million is, frankly, a fantasy. It will in all likelihood cost much more, require a contentious override, and have us starting all over again. As far as I'm concerned, the possibility of an attractive senior living community with a significant addition to our affordable housing inventory and an opportunity to either purchase the West Campus at a negotiated price or possibly share in the revenue in the sale to a third party is a good outcome for the town of the closing of Newberry College, a case of turning lemons to lemonade. On behalf of the Newberry Zoning Committee, I'm asking you to please say yes to Articles 9 through 12. Now Roger Blood will take us through the two affordable housing options.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Great. So I'm Roger Blood. I chair the Housing Advisory Board, which administers the town's inclusionary zoning bylaw. And the affordable housing obligation under this proposed Welltower development exists because of the town's inclusionary zoning bylaw. That bylaw requires basically 15% of a proposed project's units to be affordable. Now, the Welltower project has a total of 160 units, but 40 of those are memory care units and are not considered housing units under our bylaws. So for this purpose, the project is 120 housing units, and at 15% required affordable, that is equal to a minimum number of affordable units of 18 units. Now, very early on in this process, 18 affordable units on site in the main project were determined as not financially feasible, as confirmed by the town's financial consultant, Pam McKinney. Fortunately, the inclusionary bylaw provides for alternatives to on-site affordables, which in order of preference include on-site affordable units located as near as possible to the proposed project, or lowest preference, a cash payment to the Affordable Housing Trust to produce affordable housing units. So the Housing Advisory Board has developed two recommended affordable housing options for town meeting to vote what its preference will be. And while the HAB voted by a narrow margin its preference for one of these two options that you'll see in a moment, we voted unanimously that either of these two very different affordable housing options would be suitable for you to select for Welltower to fulfill its affordable housing obligation. Next slide, please. Well, that was the slide I just covered. You've heard that slide already, and we'll move to the next one, please. So the option A, the first option of these two, is the Holland Road zoning overlay that would result in the delivery of 18 affordable mixed income condominium units. Option A would be the preferred alternative under the town's inclusionary zoning bylaw, and the HAB itself voted by a narrow margin its preference also for this option. Now the site, the Holland Road site, is located on Holland Road on the former Newberry campus, directly across the street from the main Welltower project. At that site, if this option were chosen, there'd be a public process that would determine whether these 18 units of affordable housing would be via the renovation of the existing Holland Hall, the new addition to that building, or whether it would be all new construction. The neighborhood on that choice prefers renovation and a new addition to all new construction. The Welltower contribution to make this happen and deliver those units would be the land on that site, which is valued at $3.027 million, plus a cash contribution in addition to the land and building of $3.123 million, plus a $650,000 contingent backup. Welltower would contract with New Atlantic Development to design, build, and deliver the affordable housing units on Holland Road. And this option requires town meeting approval of a zoning overlay, which is Article 13 that is before you. Now, next slide, please. Option B would be a $6.525 million cash payment by Welltower to the Affordable Housing Trust. Those funds would be earmarked in the Housing Trust, and this would be a precedent for use by the Brookline Housing Authority. All proceeds would be used to rebuild and expand the BHA's Colonel Floyd Apartments. That BHA property is located near Coolidge Corner on Marion Street. All of those units under this option would be low-income senior rental housing, and this $6.5 million trust fund contribution would augment substantial other BHA subsidy sources in order to accomplish the demolition of 60 existing obsolete senior walk-up apartments and to build 100 plus new affordable units in 1 or 2 multi-story modern elevator buildings. The 100 new units would therefore include the addition of 40 to 45 net new affordable senior housing units. And no rezoning would be required for the Colonel Floyd option. If the Holland Road option is not passed by the 2/3 requirement, the Colonel Floyd option, the BHA, would be the selected choice by default under the MOA. Next slide, please. Very quickly, just a couple of visuals. The existing Holland Hall and the Holland Road site up at Newbury. And to your right, a schematic by the developer's architect of the addition that would be added to that site. Next slide, please. Likewise, the Colonel Floyd property, most of which is in the interior of a block that most people haven't seen. You can see the senior housing here, a bit tired on the right, and a little external view on the left. Next slide, please. Very quickly, this is just a summary of the metrics of the zoning article that is before you tonight. The plan for the affordable housing of the 18 units mixed income would be 6 at the lower range, 80% of AMI, 6 at 100% moderate, and 6 at up to 150, although not necessarily that high in a category that's now known as a workforce housing. There's a fallback that I won't go into the detail here that you can see in the parentheses, and that would be under an extreme circumstance where when every other reserve and contingency were to be exhausted, that the HAB could adjust the affordability if needed to complete the project. So in summary, 2/3 vote on Article 13, you'll be choosing the Holland Road option on Fisher Hill. Otherwise, the BHA affordable option for the $6.5 million through the Housing Trust. And I'm just laying the groundwork, defining these options for you, and you will hear from speakers later in this sequence advocating for each of these 2 options. Thank you.
Ms. Heller, I think you're next.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, so we come now to the third decision, which involves purchasing what Newbury called the West Campus. The purchase price we've negotiated with Welltower will be $14.8 million, which is a discounted rate of what our real estate experts estimated would be in the $17 million range as a price. It's would be funded by a debt exclusion at $14.9 million. The reason for the extra $100,000, we need some minor capital improvements like an alarm panel and with some closing costs. Town meeting would vote with a contingency for the debt exclusion ballot. That would be probably in September or November due to what happens with COVID. If not approved by the voters, Welltower would be able to sell the property and share profits with the town for any amount that they get over 14.8. Next slide, please. What will we be purchasing? We would get 13.13 acres, consists of 4 parcels with 2 buildings. And please remember the 2 buildings. You have the academic center, 31,000 square foot educational facility, which is in good condition. We could pretty much move in, maybe a little paint, alarm panel, a few other things, but it's in good condition. The West Hall, however, a stately home at 10,000 square foot, was used as classroom and administrative facility by Newberry. It's only in fair or average condition and would need work. We would get 3 parking lots with 150 cars, and that could translate to some open space. We have, and it's one of its principal amenities is the parcel is next to the Fisher Hill Reservoir Park. Next slide, please. You can see on the map here the yellow West Campus, the four different properties and how much acreage they are. And that's across the street from on Fisher Ave from the main well tower project. Next slide, please. These are some pictures. This is the academic facility, which is the one that's in good condition and we can move in. This is the front. Next slide. The back. You can see one of the parking lots. Next slide, please. This is the interior of the building. You can see that it's in reasonably good condition. Next slide. Again, the interior. Next slide. And this is West Hall. You can't really see the problems with it, but there are some. We've had our building people go through it, and there are issues, including chimney issues, elevator issues, and other code issues. Next slide, please. Now, the reasons to purchase the West Campus. This is a really unique opportunity for a strategic acquisition on Fisher Hill of municipal space. We're always hungering for space. It's a modest cost to meet the long and short-term needs of the town. Next slide, please. And we would divide the use pattern into 2 segments. One would be long-term. We have not determined any short-term use or long-term use of the West Campus. We've determined the short-term use for the academic building, but not for the for West Hall. But we have no permanent use has been determined of the entire thing. Now, the Select Board will initiate a comprehensive planning process, which is likely to span multiple years. Next slide. This is a range of uses. Doesn't mean they're the only ones. We've listed them alphabetically, but several of them seem to be very desirable in Brookline right now, especially affordable housing. We could expand the park or use, perhaps make more athletic fields. The building department is in very substandard space now. We can move them to the basement of the building for storage and offices. We need municipal and school office spaces and training centers. And tonight we just talked, or we're going to talk in the budget about training, the racial equity training across town. We'll need space for that. Recreational facilities, pool, rink, and gym are things we've talked about. The Satellite Senior Center is very desirable, and school classrooms or educational spaces are on the list as well. Next slide, please. Now, the elements of this long-term use process would be that we would create a land use committee with town officials and agencies, neighbors and residents who would be supported by experts. There would be ample public input and community engagement, public hearings, surveys, possible charrettes. We would identify the options, public dissemination and input, select board recommendation, and town meeting approval. Next slide, please. The short-term uses. The short-term plans are only for the academic building, as I've said. We would utilize all floors of the building. There are 3, the basement, the first floor, and the second floor, to address different needs across the town. The short-term period is estimated to last between 2 and 5 years. It depends upon the length of the long-term process. Next slide, please. Now, in the basement, the short-term needs would be, the basement space would satisfy the real problem we have with the building department workshop space at Los Anderson. Excuse me. It's a very substandard space. Next slide, please. You can see the pictures of it. It's a very substandard space. It's only 2,500 square feet. There are no independent workshops or storage for the carpenters and plumbers. It means really that their work is very inefficient because they have to wait until someone is finished, a carpenter, and then the plumber can work, for instance. The storage is very inadequate. We can't do bulk purchasing. And the plumbers, carpenters, or electricians have to travel frequently to Home Depot, safe, to purchase items, only single items, because we can't store them in bulk. And that's a greater cost to the town, both for the travel and not being able to buy the items in bulk. Next slide, please. So the solution is to use the workshops in the basement, what are classrooms now, 10,000 square feet. We really wouldn't have to move the walls. We could have plenty of storage space for proper organization of equipment and supplies. Each of the 3 different trades, plumbers, electricians, and carpenters, have separate work and storage spaces. And these are the people who fix our buildings. So they fix town hall, they fix the safety building, they fix the schools, the libraries, the health department, etc. So we need them to be efficient and productive. The building department would become much more efficient and cost effective. We would have ample parking for the building department vans, the pickup trucks, and the SUVs. The building department does not use any large trucks like the DPW does, so that it should not a concern for neighbors. Next slide, please. On the first floor, we have a problem in that we do not have enough meeting and conference room spaces in town hall or in other buildings. They're just not sufficient, and people have to scramble and postpone their meetings, and it's not a great situation. So we would be able to use the first floor for a municipal training and conference facility with several departments of the town, including the schools. Believe such space would be a relief to the pressures of finding adequate space in other departments. I've also talked to people in the building department, people in the police department. These are, especially in the time of COVID, we can spread people around as well. Next slide, please. The academic building, again, on the second floor, office space throughout the town is insufficient, and it may be even more cramped because of COVID. We don't know yet what the regulations are going to be when we open fully. The solution is to convert former classroom space to offices for town employees and school employees. And if there are classrooms, they would be very adequate offices. We really wouldn't have to do much to them. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, West Hall is only in fair condition, so we don't anticipate a short-term use. We will develop a use for it, and upgrades will be determined during the long-term planning process. Next slide, please. As I said, there will be a debt exclusion on the ballot in the fall, September or November. The annual cost to the impact to the taxpayers is fairly modest. A single-family home at a 3% bond rate would be $49 per year, and at a 4% bond rate, $54 per year. A condominium, $15 at 3% and $17 at 4%. Next slide, please. If voters do not, if the town meeting does not want to purchase the property, and then subsequently the town but does say yes, and then the town votes and says no, then there'll be a revenue sharing for the sale price above the 14.8 million. And the sharing scale is set to provide an incentive for as high a sale price as possible, but there would be no proceeds to the town for a sale that's under 14.8. Next slide, please. Now we move to Article 14. Because this property is used by Newbury as an educational property, we do not have the proper zoning for municipal uses that we need. So we would establish an overlay district on the west side that expands the allowed municipal uses on the site, municipal offices with associated support services, educational facilities, and then by special permit, we could have libraries, museums, public recreational facilities, again, by special permit. We would have site plan review and design review, which would be required, and design guidelines established to guide the planning board review. Next slide, please. So this is the crux of decision 3. And as I told you, the Newbury, I flipped to my Newbury, I have my Newbury hat on, my Newbury zoning chair hat. And that board, as Neil told you, that committee voted unanimously to support all of the articles, including the affordable units on Fisher Hill. Now I'm going to flip to my select board hat and inform you about the select board votes. For Articles 9 through 12, I don't think it's necessary for me to re-discuss each of these, the points under each of these articles. So I'll just, 9 to 12, we had unanimous for favorable action on the select board. Article 13, there was a split vote. 2 were in favor of the Holland Hall Road option, and 3 were in favor of Colonel Floyd. And you're going to hear more about that from Bernard Green and Raul Fernandez. Articles 14 and 15, which I just described in the West Campus, it was a unanimous select board vote for favorable action. I want to inform you, I want to let you know that now we'll flip to Steve Keynes, who's going to give you the position for the advisory.
This is Steve Keynes. Good evening. I'm speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee. You just heard a lengthy presentation of the Newbury warrant articles, so I'm going to keep this brief. Regarding warrant articles 9 through 12, the Advisory Committee believes that a persuasive case has been made for the Well Tower project, and that there is no reason to think that there would be a better alternative for either the town or the neighborhood at this location. Some of the highlights that were considered by the AC are as follows. 1, the property taxes expected from the project once full utilization is achieved are conservatively estimated at $800,000 a year. This will grow over time. This translates into a net present value of between $40 and $60 million. 2, with approval of warrant articles 9 through 12, the town will receive the benefit of the affordable housing contribution by Well Tower under either affordable housing option the town meeting decides. Not so if warrant articles 9 through 12 are not approved. 3, with approval of warrant articles 9 through 12, town meeting will be able to present the voters with a choice to acquire the West Side campus. Again, not so if warrant articles 9 through 12 are not approved. Further, there is a revenue sharing provision that you heard in Article 11, which provides for the sharing of the proceeds from the sale of the West Side campus by Well Tower in the event it is not acquired by the town. That revenue sharing will also be lost if Articles 9 through 12 are not approved. 4, and finally, building permit fees for the project are estimated to be at least $1.5 million and are projected to be realized in the fiscal year 21 to 22 timeframe. For all of these reasons, the Advisory Committee, by a vote of 27 to 0 to 1, recommends favorable action on warrant articles 9 through 12. Regarding warrant article 13, although there was a discussion of the benefits of the affordable housing option proposed on Holland Road by the Housing Advisory Board, The unanimous view of the AC was that the better choice is to replace 60 obsolete units at Colonel Floyd Apartments in Coolidge Corner with at least 100 modern senior housing units. This choice results in 40 plus new Brookline Housing Authority units in a new elevator building compared to 18 units on Holland Road without any real public transportation options. The advisory committee, by a vote of 0 to 27 to 1, recommends no action on warrant Article 13, thereby voicing its unanimous support for the Colonel Floyd project. Regarding warrant Articles 14 and 15, the AC is of the view that a persuasive case has been made that purchasing and controlling the West Side campus is in the town's long-term strategic interest, given its location and its potential uses, and that the town may not again be in a position to find a property of this quality in the foreseeable future. For these reasons, the AC is of the view that the voters should be given the opportunity to make a choice on whether to acquire the property. Regarding price, all of the evidence suggests that those negotiating on behalf of the town struck the best possible deal that was achievable, and that the valuation had not changed significantly since the pandemic. It also has to be emphasized that the town is a strategic buyer, more similar to Boston University than a developer, and that for a strategic buyer, while price is important, it is not always the most important factor. Due to our request to divide Articles 14 and 15, the advisory committee voted first on 15 and subsequently on 14. By a vote of 23 to 3 to 2, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on warrant Article 15 to appropriate $14.9 million to acquire the West Side campus, contingent on approval by the town's voters. The advisory committee, by a vote of 26 to 0 to 2, recommends favorable action on warrant Article 14, which provides the complementary zoning for the acquisition. Thank you.
Now, the next order of business under the Newbury articles is to hear from two opponents of the purchase proposed under Article 15. But before we get there, I have some administrative business to dispose of, and I apologize for not doing this in a more appropriate order, but it's got to be done, and that is to get behind us the special town meeting called within the annual town meeting. So I hereby adjourn the annual town meeting for the purpose of concluding our business under the special town meeting and convene the special town meeting within the annual. The special town meeting has one article, and it was originally conceived as a way of validating the proceedings under our virtual town meeting, which were not then authorized under state law. And so the proposal under Article 1, the only article under the special town meeting, was to authorize a home rule petition to the legislature asking that our proceedings in this meeting be validated. Well, subsequently, the legislature passed a bill approving the holding of a virtual town meeting by representative town meeting municipalities, and we were fortunate enough to be able to comply with the conditions that had to be complied with in order to be able to take advantage of this statute, which was only passed a couple of weeks ago. So that obviates the necessity of any action under the special town meeting, and the motion before you will be a motion for no action, and I propose that is the action originally proposed is no longer necessary. because of the state law that protects our proceedings, validates them. And I suggest that this should be not a recorded vote. And if anyone really wants a recorded vote on a no action vote on a useless article, we will have one. Just check with the chat monitor. So this is STM no action. And there's a request for a recorded vote. So we'll have a recorded vote. On the no action motion under Article 1 of the special town meeting, whenever you're ready to start the voting period. Okay, the voting period is commenced. Okay, may I have the count, please? Motion carries by a vote of 202 and, whoops, I'm sorry. Ms. McNally on the phone.
Oh, thank you. Yes is my vote.
Thank you. And Ms. Senical? Ms. Senical, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, I vote yes.
Okay, thank you. The motion carries by a vote of 204 in favor, 4 opposed, and 12 abstentions. I now call for a motion to dissolve the special town meeting. And we'll have to have a vote to dissolve. This will not be a recorded vote, as was agreed to earlier. Yep. The voting period is commenced. This is a vote to dissolve the special town meeting and return to the annual town meeting. I am certainly coming around to the view that we don't need 45 seconds for these votes. So I think starting tomorrow night, we'll have 30-second voting periods. And the count? And Ms. McNally on the vote to dissolve?
Reed McNally, Precinct 2, yes.
And Ms. Senical?
Yes.
The motion to dissolve carries by a vote of 209 in favor, 1 opposed, and 4 abstentions. We then now resume our proceedings under the Newbury articles, and I call on Jonathan Davis on the subject of Article 15 and 14. Mr. Davis is opposed. Mr. Davis, you may have to click on your little microphone to unmute yourself.
Oh, there we go. Can
Thank
you hear
you.
me now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Jonathan Davis. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 10. Before I start, Mr. Moderator, would you announce if Article 14 and Article 15 are both subject to a 2/3 vote? At least at
Yes.
some point? They are both. Okay, thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Moderator. Colleagues, I am speaking only about Articles 14 and 15. I am not speaking about any other Newbury articles. It's clear from the combined reports that the town does not know what to do with the West Campus. West Hall cannot be used at all without substantial work. For other buildings on an interim basis, until there is a second debt exclusion override many years from now, the town may relocate 20 building department employees and some equipment from Lars Anderson, where they have been housed for many years, but where they could continue to be housed. Maybe on an interim basis, the property could be used for overflow parking, according to the combined reports. But then again, maybe not. Maybe the property could be used for police department storage and training, according to the combined reports. But then again, maybe not. Maybe it could be used for office space for other departments, but so far there are no volunteers. Most office workers are working remotely, and they have existing offices to return to when and if it's ever safe to return to the office. Or overflow use for meetings and other programs, but maybe not in an age of pandemic when no one knows, when no one wants to have in-person meetings. But what about permanent uses? The town leadership doesn't know and isn't getting behind any of the current list of possibilities in the combined reports. A swimming pool, but maybe not. An ice skating rink, but maybe not. A gym, but maybe not. Athletic fields, but maybe not. A training center, but maybe not. Municipal office space in an age of remote office work, which will not go away because it's cheaper for employers to shift office costs onto employees who work from home, but maybe not. More building department workshops and offices, but maybe not. A satellite senior center, but maybe not, and that's assuming the elderly feel safe enough to congregate. School classrooms or educational spaces, but maybe not, especially in a location that is sandwiched between Runkle and Heath. Affordable housing, but maybe not. The town doesn't know how much the lucky winner will cost, doesn't know when it will be put to the voters for a second debt override exclusion, and isn't getting behind any of the contestants. But if Articles 14 and 15 pass, and if a first debt exclusion override passes, there will certainly be a second debt exclusion override in the West Campus, and it will be vastly larger than the first debt exclusion override. And if the voters are fed up with overrides and the second debt exclusion override fails, then what? Here's what the town gains by defeating Articles 14 and 15. The town keeps Welltower's current property tax on the West Campus, currently $140,000 with Proposition 2.5 increases. The town does not have to pay a minimum of $73,000 a year to maintain the West Campus for an indeterminate number of years until there's a second debt exclusion override or until the town throws in the towel and sells off the West Campus as a bad idea. When Welltower sells the West Campus to a developer, as Welltower has said that it will, the town receives the developer's property tax and Prop 2.5 increases on the West Campus, plus the developer's building permit and related fees. When Welltower sells the West Campus, there's the possibility of revenue sharing with the town. When the developer sells its houses to the buyers, and I estimate at least 5 luxury houses on half-acre or larger lots, the town will receive the house buyer's property taxes plus Proposition 2.5 increases. I estimate the property taxes would start at about $210,000 a year for 5 luxury houses. If town meeting votes to rezone the main portion of Newbury so that Welltower can proceed with its project, then in that case, the town does not have to take Welltower's property tax and send it back to Welltower to pay for the West Campus. It's been credibly estimated that when the Welltower project achieves stabilization, Welltower will generate at least $800,000 a year plus Proposition 2.5 increases. But a first debt exclusion override to purchase the West Campus would sop up the Welltower property taxes for at least 20 years. It would be really nice if the town could use all that property tax revenue from Welltower over the course of 20 or more years on necessary things and not have to give it back to Welltower just to acquire the West Campus, a parcel that the town does not know what to do with and has no idea what it will cost to do it with. The town, I believe, is not some sort of hedge fund where the town buys a speculative asset to see if it works out or goes bust. There are real benefits to the town in just saying no to the West Campus and real disadvantages to saying yes. Please vote no action on Articles 14 and 15.
Thank you, Ms. Stanford. Claire.
Okay, Claire Stamper, Precinct 5. I'm speaking in opposition to Article 15. I am recommending no action on Article 15. I do not think that now is the time for the town to purchase land for an undefined future use. Such a purchase would require the town to go further into debt by asking for a new debt exclusion. As reported by BFAC in February of this year, since 2015, Brookline has had a rising level of debt service. Currently, we have debt exclusions for the Ridley School, for the Brookline High School, which is already over budget and will require additional borrowing, for Driscoll, and coming up soon is Pierce. I do not think that we should be adding to our debt burdens with elective purchases. At this time, there is no certain use for this parcel. Lack of a defined use for the Oak Street parcel, for example, was a main reason of the proponent of Article 16 to recommend that the town now sell the Oak Street parcel. Even before the advent of COVID-19, BFAC showed that by 2021, that is next year, our expenditures will exceed our revenues. BFAC recommended that Brookline develop a strategy for periodic operating and capital overrides. We need an operating override now. We will have to be vigilant and continue social distancing and other measures to avoid infection until there is an approved vaccine or treatment against this coronavirus. Dr. Anthony Fauci has said that maybe in 1 year we will have a vaccine. I certainly hope so, but in the meantime, we need to provide town services and educate our children. To do both in the face of dropping commercial revenues will require a tax override. We will need to ask our taxpayers to pass such an override, and I am concerned that if the request comes after another request for a debt exclusion, that the override may not pass. Without additional funds, we will not be able to maintain the level of municipal services and school programming which we expect and deserve. Please do not add to the burden. Please vote favorable action on the Newberry Articles 9 to 12, but vote no action on the West Parcel Purchase, Article 15. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to have 4 speakers who will speak on both sides of the Article 13 issue. First, Ms. Raitt from the Housing Advisory Board. R-A-I-T-T.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer Raitt at 2 Harvard Square and a member of the Townsend Housing Advisory Board since January of 2018. I am a practicing urban planner specializing in housing, land use, and community development. Tonight, I'm going to share why I voted to support Holland Road. My goal from the start was to apply the inclusionary zoning bylaw in the way it was meant to be applied. Much like many other inclusionary zoning bylaws throughout Massachusetts, our bylaw is very clear. On-site mixed income housing is a priority and the goal. That priority and goal could not be achieved due to the housing type proposed by Welltower. When that primary goal cannot be achieved, the bylaw states that other methods are possible if the result will be advantageous to the town in creating or preserving affordable units and will not result in the undue concentration of affordable units. The methods offered in the bylaw are in order of preference. The first method is creating affordable housing off-site, preferably in the same neighborhood as the on-site development. The second is the conveyance of land or buildings as a donation, preferably in the same neighborhood as the on-site development. To the town's housing trust. I opted for the off-site option on Holland Road for the following reasons. The town has a goal to affirmatively further fair housing, and this does so in 3 ways. 1, adding the off-site affordable housing inventory in the same neighborhood as the on-site housing, and in a place where there is not a high concentration of affordable housing. 2, advancing the town's preference for population and social economic diversity throughout Brookline by creating more housing that is affordable to a range of incomes. And 3, creating housing for what's called the missing middle. The town's select board and planning board adopted and the state approved a housing production plan, which includes the need to address housing demand for the quote, missing middle. That's everybody above 80% of the area median income. There are only 187 affordable homeownership units out of the 2,500 units on the town's subsidized housing inventory. That's only 7% of the entire inventory and less than 1.5% of Brookline's owner-occupied homes. The imbalance has an impact. This project represents the creation of housing options for moderate income and the missing middle. Lastly, the proposed design of Holland Road aligns with preferences for new or infill development in Brookline, including preservation of neighborhood integrity and stability and reusing existing buildings potentially, while creating modestly sized housing opportunities. Now, while these points illustrate my reasoning for making this choice, I want to highlight a few important items for town meeting to recognize. Perhaps not this evening or another evening, but at a future town meeting. First, in addition to the preferences previously stated, the housing production plan also states the town's preference for 1, rehabbing and preserving housing authority units, and 2, creating and preserving affordable housing, utilizing inclusionary zoning housing trust funds, and through other incentives. Well, this simply illustrates that creating affordable housing is not either or, but ideally both and. Second, ideally, Holland Road would accommodate a range of housing unit sizes and even more units overall. While the town's inclusionary zoning has led to the creation of many affordable units, 40B, or comprehensive permits, have been the primary way that the town has added affordable units to its inventory. Amending our zoning to meet local housing needs and demand, specifically by making allowances in our zoning for multifamily homes by right, and amending dimensional and density requirements to make that happen, will continue to be an issue until we choose to address it. We should be leveraging our zoning for even more affordable opportunities. In closing, the housing plan suggested that Brookline is trending toward becoming a community with the haves, have-mores, and public housing. Welcoming housing in Brookline requires a dedicated shift in the way we are thinking and what we are doing. I believe we can recognize and commit to our community values for increasing socioeconomic and racial diversity by increasing housing availability and affordable housing in Brookline through Holland Road. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call on Mr. Jacobs, and before he starts speaking, I want to remind everyone that there is a 3-minute limit to your presentations, and we have a great many speakers on these articles, plus at least 5 people who have already signed up to ask questions in the question and answer period that we'll get to in due course. And I'm going to strictly enforce the 3-minute limit henceforth. So, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Mike Jacobs, Chair of the Brookline Housing Authority and a member of the HAB. Patrick Dober, Executive Director, and I will be presenting the BHA's argument against warrant Article 13. Colonel Floyd is a 60-unit senior and disabled property consisting of 6 buildings, all of which are 2-story walk-ups. It has no community rooms for social services and community gatherings. The outdated systems rely on fossil fuels, and the units are very small. While Colonel Floyd is one of 6 federally funded BHA developments eligible for HUD redevelopment funding, our other North Brookline senior developments are mid-rise properties that have elevators and community spaces and can be effectively renovated. But the only option for Colonel Floyd is rebuilding. When we looked at the surrounding buildings in the neighborhood, the existing zoning, the availability of transportation and shopping, minimizing the need for automobiles, and a waiting list of 4,300 seniors, it also made sense to add 40 additional new apartments on the Colonel Floyd site. A new 100-unit development would have multiple positive impacts. Not only would we add the 40 new units, but we would enable 60 current Brookline residents to better age in place in a service-enriched environment. Working with a development consultant with 40 years of experience, we prepared a realistic financing plan that involves receiving the bulk of financing through a state competition, something the BHA successfully accomplished at its Dummer Street development. But we still faced a large unsolved funding gap until the Wellflower funding option emerged. Without the Welltower funds, the chance to save and expand the community asset will be lost. There is no other viable funding option. The plan requires the full $6.5 million Welltower contribution. While it has been mentioned that the real estate transfer tax or CPA are viable alternatives for the $6.5 million, they do not exist now, and it is not at all clear if they will be available in the near future. While we all hope these sources will become available, it is hard to predict how the pandemic will impact these proposals. The reason that public housing is characterized by properties like Colonel Floyd with millions of dollars of unfunded needs is reflected in a history of policymakers always placing public housing on the back burner. Please do not do that tonight. Given there is no source of the magnitude of $6.5 million on the horizon that can fill this funding gap, we urge you to vote no on warrant Article 13. I would like to now turn our presentation over to Patrick Dober, who would just like to make a few additional remarks. Thank you.
Mr. Dober. Try clicking on your little microphone, Mr. Dober.
I apologize. I should know that by now. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Patrick Dober, Director of the Housing Authority. Appreciate the chance just to highlight some of the critical points about why a no vote the Housing Authority believes is the right vote, since that will support the Colonel Floyd project. Public housing, as a program that supports low-income, underserved populations, has been systematically underfunded virtually since its inception. And right now, the Brookline community has an opportunity in its own way to help correct that injustice. It's really a once-in-a-generation opportunity to totally rebuild and expand this invaluable community asset. The 40 new apartments that our chairman mentioned, by the way, would be one of the largest additions to the town's supply of affordable housing in the past half a century. And I think, as many know, the Housing Authority has demonstrated the capacity and the expertise needed to win the additional subsidies that will need to move the project forward in short order and get to a construction start. And by the way, the $6.5 million in inclusionary zoning funds will be leveraged by about 8 to 1 by the additional dollars that the Housing Authority expects to raise, primarily from federal and state tax credits and tax-exempt bonds. We do want to note, it's very important to the town, many in the town, that we will continue our track record of green construction. We will replace existing inefficient fossil fuel mechanical systems with state-of-the-art electric systems. And as a Brookline only, not-for-profit housing developer, we will ensure that all the apartments will be restricted as low-income housing in perpetuity. And of course, that any fees or income that the Housing Authority may earn would go to only one future purpose, and that's creating and preserving more additional affordable housing in Brookline. You know, just to mention, we understand that while we are confident about our plans and approach, we also understand that as we go forward, it's not a blank check that we would be receiving tonight. In the least, there will be and should be review of the details of our plans going forward by the relevant Housing Advisory Board, the Planning Board, and so on. And we will remain open to suggestions for improvement to make it even better. For example, if zoning and funding allowed, we would be glad to create a project of even more than 100 units. We're talking about 100 units total at this time because that's what existing zoning allows, and we want to be able to move forward as quickly as possible. But we are open to improvements from the community as we go along. So appreciate the support very much. Remember, please, that there's a reverse logic. To vote no on warrant Article 13 or no action will be to support the Colonel Floyd project, by far and away the most productive option for affordable housing. And Chairman Jacobs and I will be available and stay online if anyone needs to call on us for points of fact, Mr. Moderator, as we go along.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Okay. You can probably see me now. Mr. Moderator, I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Select Board and an at-large member of Town Meeting. In my view, there are two issues that Town Meeting should think about in considering warrant Article 13, and that the town must grapple with, irrespective of whether warrant Article 13 is approved. First, the importance of beginning to provide on a sustained level mixed income housing opportunities that are attractive to lower middle to middle income families. Second is whether concentrating lower income senior housing in a relatively small part of Brookline is the best way of thinking about lower affordable housing, or even whether concentrating low-income families and disabled residents in any of the other areas where such housing is located today is the best way of thinking about citing affordable housing. People may pose this as a question of racial equity and other laudable goals, but in my opinion, we should focus on providing affordable housing opportunities and racial equity across the entire town. So first, I urge Town Meeting to vote in favor of warrant Article 13. It is not perfect, but it does give us mixed income housing in the low to low middle income bracket that offers opportunities of home ownership to people, including people who work in Brookline, such as town or school employees. Again, it's not perfect, but it is a start. It also makes the statement that we are working to fill the housing needs of people all across the income spectrum. Brookline is not sustainable in the long run without housing opportunities for the middle class. And that includes the lower middle class, an important part of the middle class community. Although only a few units will be two-bedroom condominiums that would be attractive to young families, this does represent an opportunity to continue the small steps already begun to offer housing opportunities to such families. With proper oversight and required marketing to families in diverse Boston neighborhoods, we would increase the likelihood of attracting particularly lower middle income and middle income Black residents seeking housing opportunities outside of traditionally Black Boston neighborhoods. This is a crucial target demographic if we are to be successful in racial integration in Brookline. And it's critically important, and we are required by federal housing laws to do that. The Colonel Floyd option is attractive in many ways, but it has one problem that I think has to be grappled with. The concentration of low-income senior and other housing in an approximately 4 square block area that includes 3 high-rise senior housing buildings in the Colonel Floyd site. The long-term consequences of such concentration is not good for long-term sustainability of an inclusive and racially stable community. Irrespective of whether town meeting votes for or against Warrant Article 13, I believe the town and the Brookline Housing Authority must give much more thought to how we site our affordable housing units across the entire town, because right now we have, in addition to the area around Colonel Floyd, other areas where we have concentrated and segregated low-income families and people with disabilities. There are many legitimate reasons for this, but we need to begin to think beyond the current constraints of funding, market forces, and other factors that have led us to this current situation. Thank you.
So that was 4 minutes and 15 seconds. I'm a little bit of a loss here as to, it's very difficult to interrupt you in in this configuration, but I will certainly try. Mr. Fernandez?
Hello, I'll try to get you back on track, Mr. Moderator. This is Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member, speaking only for myself and only against Article 13. I will keep this short and sweet. There are no terrible options here, but there is clearly a best option. Nearly everyone who is deeply concerned and actively involved in the development of affordable housing in Brookline is against Article 13 and therefore in favor of the Colonel Floyd option, myself included. We believe in the Brookline Housing Authority's ability to manage these funds efficiently and effectively because they have a track record of doing just that. While permanently affordable home ownership and generational wealth building are critically important goals to help lift up people with low incomes and especially people of color, we have a long way to go before I can be certain that developments like the Holland Road option will meet those goals. For instance, we currently have 153 affordable condos in Brookline that have been created by our inclusionary zoning bylaw. However, out of those 153 units, just 5 are occupied by Black residents or families. That is simply unacceptable, particularly during this time when our community is united in calls to address systemic racism. Clearly, there's a systemic problem with how these units are being allocated, and that has to be fixed before I'll support an expansion of that model. I've spoken with the chair of the Housing Advisory Board on this issue, and I'm hopeful that we can work together on a fix for that while also moving forward on a plan to more thoughtfully develop our own permanently affordable homes rather than simply waiting for targets of opportunity to come along like this one. In the meantime, it's important for us to support programs that we know do work, those that add diversity to our community, those which are accessible to public transit, those which are built sustainably, and those that provide the kind of wraparound services that the BHA and their partners are known for. I'll be voting no action on Article 13 and therefore in favor of the well-planned, high-impact Colonel Floyd option. I hope you will too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sainer, who has 5 minutes.
Good evening. I'm Paul Sainer, Precinct 13, a resident of Fisher Hill and one of the negotiators with Welltower, which I've done a lot of with complex real estate transactions like this. Our negotiations were guided by 2 key questions. Did we get as much as we could from Welltower? And what is the highest and best use of the land? Let's start with the second question first. Our advisors looked at a range of values for the land, including a continuation of the nearly 70 years of tax exempt use, a range of residential uses allowed under zoning, and also the senior living zoning. Their conclusions were that for both sides of the street, east and west, that a educational nonprofit use remains far and away the highest and best use. And the reason is because of the intrinsic value of the existing buildings at the former Newberry College campus. We were also told that Welltower bought the entire campus at a significant discount to its market value due to significant restrictions imposed by Newberry College on the transaction disposition. As just one example, the price they paid was a 13% discount from the assessed value of the campus just a year ago. Now, it's very unusual in Brookline for a property in a residential zone to have a higher and better value than residential. And I want to stop and comment on Mr. Davis's suggestion that if the town doesn't buy the property, then Welltower will sell to a residential developer. I think that's very unlikely because the residual land value for a residential development is a fraction of the value for a nonprofit use. The senior living value ascribed to this development, if it's approved tonight, is less, according to our consultant Pam McKinney, than the nonprofit educational use. So this notion that if we pass the upzoning, the land is suddenly going to become much more valuable is not accurate. Now, with respect to the negotiations, they were very hard, and I think both parties negotiated in good faith. The focus of the negotiations was threefold. First, to get the size of the project whittled down, which our architects did by 9%, in order for the committee to then conclude that it looked like it would be neighborhood contextual. And at that point, we asked McKinney, who's reviewed more than $5 billion of senior living assets, to look at the detailed Welltower pro forma. And her conclusion was that the return to Welltower was on the absolute low end of a market acceptable range. Now, that was before considerable additional negotiation. We improved considerably from that point the inclusionary zoning value of the two alternatives. And we also reduced considerably the dual option price on the west side. Now, Welltower, as the developer, is the party at risk. And I do want to remind you all that since the warrant closed and the pandemic hit, Welltower, whose stock price has gone down by 40% and therefore is incurring considerably greater risk and costs, never once came back trying to renegotiate. I want to conclude by stating that the Newberry Committee is not aware of a more favorable use of the land than what has been proposed. The senior living proposal, while not the highest land value, is clearly the highest tax value and will generate considerably more affordable housing than any other alternative. So we have a unique opportunity after having lost two major commercial properties to nonprofit owners over the last year to put half of this campus back on the tax roll for the next 95 years. And the neighborhood is very supportive of this. If you approve the upzoning, then the town will be the beneficiary of the largest inclusionary zoning cash payment ever. And we do have the dual option on the west side that I frankly think is a strategically important enough opportunity for a town meeting to allow the voters to decide whether they want to pay for it. So in conclusion, I would ask with respect to decision 1, that you join the unanimous boards and commissions that have heard this article and approve the Welltower transaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Yeah, I'm Frank Carroll, town meeting member, precinct 10. I appreciate having an opportunity to express my reservations about Articles 14 and 15. I think Jonathan Davis and Claire Stamper did a good job of laying out the fundamental reasons for being skeptical about these articles. I want to really kind of focus my modest remarks on kind of my concerns about going to the voters with kind of an open-ended notion that we would have we'd ask them to improve purchasing these properties. We have some ideas of their temporary use, and then we would have a very robust process for determining a permanent use of the property. My concern with the manner in which we do that is that there's a distinct likelihood that we would never come to a consensus about what the permanent use of the property would be, and that the short-term use would become the long-term use. And I'm really skeptical about whether the short-term uses that Nancy Heller outlined for us are really compelling enough to really justify the purchase. And I just want to call your attention to a case in point, and that is the Center Street parking lot. I think for at least 20 years, there have been many people who've been following town affairs who are persuaded that the town's use of that property is less than optimal. There have been lots of interesting ideas for making better use of it, but there has been no impossibility of coming to some agreement about how to better use it. And so we're so tired of that discussion, we don't talk about it anymore. And I think there is really the same potential with the west parcel. I think if it is going to be brought to the voters, it would make much more sense to bring it to the voters with a compelling purpose in mind. So thank you.
Well, while Mr. Hyken is figuring out his technology, let's hear from Ms. Lodish.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Moderator, for some reason my screen froze and I did not hear you call my name until you just reappeared.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, I will proceed. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Steve Hyken. I am the chair of the planning board and speaking for the planning board. I was also a member of the Newbury Zoning Committee and the Newbury Architectural Subcommittee, and I'm a member of the Housing Advisory Board as well. I would want to use most of my time to talk about Article 13 because that's clearly the one where there are two interesting, very good, and very different choices. But I will preface that by saying that as far as the three zoning articles, including Articles 9 and 14, on 9 and 14, the planning board voted unanimously for favorable action. concurring with the recommendations of the advisory committee and the select board, we think the well tower project is a good project. Its design process so far has been excellent. There are also design guidelines that will further guide the development of the design, and a design advisory team has already been established, provided the zoning passes, and will move into action quite soon. As far as the West Campus overlay, provided the town agrees to acquire the campus, the zoning changes there will be useful in allowing a broader range of potential short-term uses. As far as the key question on Article 13 is concerned, we concur with the sentiments that you heard from Jennifer Raitt of the Housing Advisory Board, and I concurred with her in the HAB's vote in favor of the Holland Road site. With all due respect to the Housing Authority and the excellent work that they're doing on their group of federally subsidized public housing, they are the owners of Colonel Floyd. It is a much needed renovation, and it could very well be expanded by, as you heard Patrick Dover say, 40 units or perhaps more. I think the planning board would be very interested in hearing something that actually enlarges that number at the appropriate time. But they own that site. They will, at some point, I am sure, we are sure, find the ability to finance that site, whether or not the $6 million+ from Welltower is available. They have been getting funding from the Housing Advisory Board, and I expect they will continue to do that. And there are other potentials.
Well, Mr. Heiken, I'm sorry that your presentation was cut short, but I think you've gotten your point across, and I will call on Ms. Lodish for the Fisher Hill neighborhood, and then we'll proceed to a question and comment and answer period. Ms. Lodish?
Whoops. Oh, thank you very much. I'm Pam Lodish, Precinct 14 Town Meeting member, a member of the Advisory Committee, and speaking for the Fisher Hill Association. The Fisher Hill Association is comprised of approximately 400 households. We held a virtual annual town meeting in May when we reviewed the various Welltower articles and also discussed the possibility of acquiring the west parcel. I'm happy to report to you that 75% of the Fisher Hill neighbors who attended the annual meeting voted to support the Welltower articles. The neighborhood had several representatives on the Newbury Zoning Committee that negotiated the details of the project that's being presented today. Welltower did extensive neighborhood outreach with multiple meetings at the property. And in particular, there was considerable dialogue with the Olmsted Hill abutting neighbors that led to design changes. In addition, our neighborhood voted 75% in favor to support the select board vote to put the acquisition of the west parcel of the former Newbury College property to the voters in Brookline. If the voters support the acquisition of the west parcel, the neighbors have been told that there will be a process to determine how this land and buildings will be used, and we expect to be part of the process and have a seat at the table. I'm proud to report that in the past, the Fisher Hill neighborhood has supported the Olmsted Affordable Housing Project on Fisher Avenue, the development of the Fisher Hill Park, and also way back a long time ago, the neighborhood supported the development of the Longyear Museum property on Seaver so that it could become part of the tax base and provide needed tax revenue for the town. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lodish. All right, we're now going to proceed to a question and answer period, and I would prefer that most of you ask questions rather than give speeches, because there was an opportunity to do that, and you missed out on it. So, Ms. Mautner.
Good evening. It's easier to hear.
You're fine.
Okay, Rebecca Mautner, Precinct 11. I just want to clarify that what is before town meeting is actually not a vote on Colonel Floyd. I did search the warrant, and the motions are simply about whether we are moving forward with the mixed income zoning proposed in warrant Article 13, or funds are going to the Housing Trust?
Yeah, that's certainly correct.
Thank you.
You have the consensus of those who favor defeating Article 13 that the alternative payment be devoted to the properties near Coolidge Corner, but that's not cast in concrete.
It's not really what we're voting on. Thank you very much.
Mr. Goldstein? Ken Goldstein.
Thank you. Am I unmuted now?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Ken Goldstein, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 14. I'm going to start with a disclosure of conflict of interest, as is suggested by the Town Meeting Member Handbook. I am a direct abutter to Holland House, and there's the possibility that's not, nobody knows the future, but there's the possibility that my property value could be impacted by the outcome of the warrant Article 13 vote. To be absolutely clear, it would be impacted by 18 units of market rate development. There's in no way, shape, or form am I or my neighbors opposed to more affordable housing in the Fisher Hill neighborhood. We've almost unanimously supported 35 units at Olmsted Hill, and I think you would find that the Fisher Hill neighbors would support affordable housing on the west side of Fisher Ave as well. I wanted to make that extremely clear. It doesn't surprise me at all that the Housing Advisory Board supports warrant Article 13. Their mission is more affordable housing, the better. When I was on the HAB, I probably would have taken that exact same position. But what the Housing Advisory Board doesn't do is necessarily think about this in practical terms. And I promise, Mr. Moderator, I'm about to get to my question. So given the financial straits that have been brought on by the coronavirus, brought on by the recession that we talked about earlier, by the school budget issues that we have, by the need that we might have very shortly for an operating override, you have to ask yourself, and I'm asking you perhaps rhetorically, how likely is it that we're going to come upon another source for $6.5 million to seed the Colonel Floyd project? It's a golden opportunity at Colonel Floyd to build 100 units with the same money that would only build 18 on Fisher Hill. So if somebody wants to elaborate, I know Steve Hyken made reference to other sources of funding, but I think those sources of funding are drying up in our current environment, and that's my question.
Well, I really take that as a comment rather than a question, Mr. Goldstein, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Move on. Okay, we'll move on to Representative Vitolo.
Mr. Moderator, Tommy Vitolo, Town Meeting Member at Large. I have a question, and depending on the answer, possibly a subsidiary motion. My question is there a legal, ethical, or other reason why we ought to vote on rezoning the parcel in Article 14 before we choose whether or not we would like to buy it, rather than after we have decided whether or not we would like to buy it?
Well, I've advertised as our procedure that will deal with Articles 14 and 15 together, unless for some reason there's a motion to divide that question, in which case we will vote first on Article 15 and then on Article 14.
In that case, I would like to make a motion to divide the question so that we would have a better sense of who owns the parcel before we decide on what the zoning of that parcel would be.
Well, I don't think we have to put that to a vote, Mr. Vitolo. I've told the proponents that if someone wants to divide the question, we would do so and vote first on Article 15 and then on Article 14. So, Mr.
Thank
Brown,
you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Cliff Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Cliff Brown, Precinct 14.
member of the advisory committee, and also a former member of BFAC. And Mr. Moderator, I did ask ahead of time, this will be a set of comments as opposed to a question, so I beg everyone's indulgence. I really want to talk about the West Side and just point out to folks that I'm a little confused by some of the comments. In a situation like this, where the town has an opportunity to buy a property from a willing seller, we will never, ever be afforded sufficient time to determine what the final use will be prior to having to make the acquisition. It's just not going to happen. The process to determine a final use takes years. So that argument would effectively prevent us from ever taking advantage of a similar situation. And frankly, I really just don't understand the logic behind that. The last time the town had an opportunity to buy a piece of land like this was back in 2001, I believe, when the state sold the reservoir that is now Fisher Hill Park next to where this property stands. It took 10 years of planning for that project to be finalized, and it didn't open until 2016. And even though the state kind of dictated it needed to be recreational use, the final determination of what that use was and how it was designed took us, 10 years. If people here, if we all want to be thinking about the intermediate to long-term view of what is best for the town and its future residents, we wouldn't pass on this chance, particularly given the lack of sufficient facilities to meet the needs of our municipality, which frankly continues to grow and which will be pressured to add additional housing and related amenities. I believe that if we do pass, we will immediately regret it when Welltower sells to either a Dover user or takes a loss, as Paul Sainer suggested, and sells to a developer who just builds 5 large mansions when we could have purchased this or potentially purchased this and built, let's say, affordable housing. What we're really doing here is giving the voters the opportunity to tax themselves outside of the levy and to make their decision. I do not think that the voters in this town are going to look at this and decide that they want to do this, but then decide they don't want to build a school. I just think our voters are smarter than that. I think that they will make a determination if both those opportunities are right for them. But I think it is expedient, if you will, to use an argument that says, let's not do this now because of a fear of what people will do 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road for something that is a completely different use. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Deborah Brown.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Deborah Brown, Precinct 1. My question is, when evaluating the relative benefits of the number of units created, 100 units versus 18 units, what factors were to be considered above and beyond the locations of the physical location that is the neighborhood of the units?
Mr. Jacobs, do you want to respond to that?
I think that's probably something maybe Roger could respond to, given he has the comparison for the HAB.
Okay, Mr. Blood?
Yes, am I unmuted?
Yep.
Well, the Housing Advisory Board, as I mentioned, did conclude that both options were good and acceptable despite the close vote. And as you heard, Jennifer Raitt articulated the reasons for the Holland Road option, and you heard from several other speakers as well in terms of the geographic dispersion. And one of the reasons we really brought both options are because there's a number of various considerations that need to be brought to account. So We recognized that the Colonel Floyd option had more units, served a deeper subsidized set of beneficiaries. But in terms of the question of the concentration, that's something that you've heard about tonight, and that's one of many factors where you could set up an imaginary scorecard, what pros and what cons you want to choose from, and which ones you're going to put the most weight upon yourself as you vote. So the Housing Advisory Board, I don't think really came to a conclusion that more or less concentration at the Colonel Floyd site was either good or bad. We looked at the overall plans from the Brookline Housing Authority and considered early on whether there were other locations that should be included in this funding and or other configurations. But at the end of the day, we asked the Housing Authority to do their best an intense effort to bring as robust of a proposal to the table at this early date as possible for your consideration of that one of two very different options.
Thank you, Mr. Swartz.
Mr. Moderator, this is more of a comment than a question in support of Colonel Floyd. So if you don't think this is appropriate, I would yield my time. That it would.
No, go ahead, but tell us who you are.
Yes, Chuck Swartz, Precinct 9. As a Coolidge Corner resident, I've attended many meetings by developers of 40Bs in the neighborhood, and they always use the fact that it is close to transportation, that it's a transit-centered neighborhood, and that's why 40Bs would be a good use to provide affordable housing in that neighborhood. Here we have a chance to, by rehabbing Colonel Floyd, to provide 100 units of affordable housing without having to depend on 40Bs. That would disrupt the neighborhood. And we would benefit from the infusion of the money from Welltower. So I would urge people to support Colonel Floyd by voting no on Article 13. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ridrejo.
Mr. Moderator, I think you missed me on the pre-slots that I had requested, but if I may, can I give you my comments on Articles 9 through 12?
You may. You were next on the list, but so are a number of other people. Go ahead.
Tell
us who you were. Thank you.
Carlos Ridrejo, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 14, and Advisory Committee, and a member of the Newsbury Zoning Committee, but speaking on my behalf. I urge the town meeting to vote yes on warrants Articles 9 through 12, the Welltower redevelopment, the senior housing project at the former Newbury College eastern side of the campus. As a member of the Newbury Zoning Committee Architectural Subcommittee, I worked closely with Welltower's architectural team, Robert A.M. Stern from New York and Feingold Alexander from here in Boston. And over the course of several public meetings I attended, which were attended by the general public, neighbors, and direct abutters, the architectural subcommittee guided a reduction of 9% to the proposed building mass, as well as a reduction from the initial FAR of 1.35 to 1.15, and other significant changes to the site plan and building design. For example, at the south side of the property, which is closest, has the closest abutters, we increased the building setback from the original 20 feet to 43 feet, and the surface parking setback from the original 3 feet to 20 feet. We also moved 20 parking spaces from surface parking area to the covered garage parking, which is substantially more expensive for the developer, but increases green open space at the site. In addition, we reduced the overall height of the building by about 1 floor or 10 feet. Finally, we convinced the developer to save all of the 20,000 square foot historic Mitten House for adaptive reuse. Most importantly, perhaps, the Newbury Zoning Committee Architectural Subcommittee developed the design guidelines to inform the design advisory team, the DAT, which now will continue to refine the design of the project as it progresses through the rest of the town process. I want to be clear that we are only at the beginning of the design process, and there's still a lot to be done. A highlight of the project will be the preservation of the large existing street trees along Holland Road and Fisher Avenue. Part of this process will include to further develop the substantial number of sustainable features as a lead NC version 4 gold certified project that it will incorporate. For example, it will be compliant with the new fossil fuel free bylaw, except for perhaps the swimming pool, water efficient plumbing fixtures, building commissioning, and energy saving passive house strategies, which allow for lower energy use. The site will also use permeable pavements, stormwater control measures, such as garden and biosoils. So please vote yes on warrant articles 9 through 12. Thank you.
Well, the question has been called. I will tell you that we have 3 people on in line for the Q&A period. Marty Rosenthal, Daniel Stone, and Susan Roberts. I have 6 people lined up to speak, all in favor of the project generally. I'm sorry, 5. Ms. Scanlon, Mr. Leckler, Ms. Gray, Mr. Lynn Jones, and Mr. Richmond. In my view, we have had an adequate airing of the issues, and I will allow the motion for the question. So this is a motion to terminate debate. Motion for the question, Article 9. And when you're ready to start the time, please do so. Okay, this will be a recorded vote. As I told you, all of the Newbury articles, including this one, will be recorded votes. So there's no need for you to ask for it for any of the remaining Newbury articles. This one will be a recorded vote. So. This requires a 2/3 vote, by the way. Okay. Okay, the voting period is elapsing. And the voting period is over. May I have the count, please? 175 yes, 50 no, 6 abstentions. I'm sorry, how many no? 50. 5-0. And how many abstentions? 6. Okay, Ms. McNally? This is on the motion to terminate debate. Rita. I'm sorry?
Rita McNally, Precinct 2, member of the Housing Advisory Board and CDBG Committee. 9, Articles 9 to 12, yes.
Well, wait, we're not on those. We're on a motion to terminate debate.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Senecal? Ms. Senecal?
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't unmuted in time. Barbara Senecal, 13, yes to end debate.
And Anita Johnson has joined us by phone. Ms. Johnson? Okay, the motion carries by a vote of 177 in favor, 50 opposed, and 6 abstentions. We now proceed to a series of votes. The first vote will be to approve the motions under Articles 9 through 12. We will take them as a block because they are dependent on one another, and all of them need to pass in order to have a successful vote. Requires a 2/3 vote, and this will be, of course, a recorded vote. Just to review, the motion under Article 9 is on page 9-62 to 71. 10 is 14 to 16. For restrictive covenant, 11-75 to 81. The approval of the memorandum of understanding, and 12, pages 2 to 3, the grant of an easement. On the motions under Articles 9 through 12, whenever you're ready to start the timing. Okay, the time period has started. Press 1 if you favor these motions, 2 if you're opposed, and abstain if you're abstaining, and then submit. Okay, may I have the preliminary count?
We have 223 yes, 7 no, 1 abstention.
Okay, Ms. McNally, this is on 9 through 12.
Yes. Rita McNally, Precinct 2, yes.
Yep. Barbara Senecal,
Barbara Senecal, Precinct 3, yes.
and Anita Johnson, are you with us?
I am, yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 226 in favor, 7 opposed, and 1 abstention. We now turn to Article 13. The motion is on pages 13-1 through 13-4, a conversion of the form of article. And bear in mind that this is a zoning article. If you pass it, it requires a 2/3 vote to pass. And that will mean that the project that you've heard described for Holland Road will be funded by the developer. If you defeat this article, then the developer will pay $6 million to the town for use, in all likelihood, as the gentlemen from the BHA have described. So on the motion under Article 13, this is Article 13 main motion. Go ahead. The voting period is commenced. Okay, the voting period has lapsed. May I have the count, please?
22 yes, 206 no, 4 abstentions.
Ms. McNally?
Rita McNally, Precinct 2, no on 13.
No. Ms. Senecal?
No.
Ms. Johnson?
Barbara Senecal, Precinct 13, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Okay, Ms. Johnson?
Nita Johnson, Precinct 8, no.
That motion fails by a vote of 23 in favor, 208 opposed, and 4 abstentions. We now turn to Article 15. And this will be a recorded vote, of course. The motion is on pages 15-14 through 17, and it's, as you heard described, to authorize the select board to acquire the property on the west side of Fisher Avenue. Requires a 2/3 vote. This is Article 15, main motion. And whenever you're ready to start the, okay, we're in the voting period. Yes, if you favor this acquisition or authorizing the acquisition. No, if you oppose it, and abstain if you abstain. Okay, the voting period is terminated. May I have the count, please?
198 yes, 28 no, 7 abstentions.
Ms. McNally?
McNally, Precinct 2, yes.
Ms. Senecal?
Barbara Senecal, Precinct 13, yes.
And Ms. Johnson?
Anita Johnson, Precinct 8, yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 201 in favor, 28 opposed, and 7 abstentions. And finally, what you've just done is to authorize the select board to acquire the property at on the west side of Fisher Avenue, the former Newbury College property. And you have appropriated $14.9 million for the purpose of making that acquisition, which has apparently been agreed to by the developer Welltower. And all of this is contingent on a favorable debt override ballot question, which will be put to the voters at large. Turning now to Article 14, which would amend on the pages 14-6 to 14-7, would amend the zoning applicable to the property that you've just authorized the selectmen to purchase to make it consistent with the municipal uses of that property. Requires a 2/3 vote. It will be a recorded vote, and you may start the timing. This is Article 14, main motion. The timing has begun. The voting period is concluded. May I have the count?
213 yes, 10 no, 8 abstentions.
Ms. McNally?
Yes. Rita McNally, Precinct 2, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Senical?
Barbara Senical, Precinct 13, yes.
And Ms. Johnson?
Anita Johnson, Precinct 8, yes.
The motion carries by a vote of 216 to 10 to 8. And Ms. Goldsmith?
Oh, hi. Yeah, just to remind you, we have a select board. We don't have selectmen, and we have town leaders, not town fathers. You can make a little note if it's hard to remember that, but the language is select board at this point.
Well, I did my very best, Ms. Goldsmith, and
I have so much confidence you can do even better.
my best wasn't quite good enough this evening, but we have gotten through a session of our virtual town meeting on relatively unscathed, except for your moderator. And I call for a motion to adjourn the annual town meeting until 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening tomorrow, at which session we will deal with all of the articles other than the budget article, and I would hope put those to bed. And I will send around a description of how we're going to proceed from there, so that you'll be comfortable that your critical votes on the budget will be reviewable. So on the motion to adjourn, this is not a recorded vote. May not be a vote at all. Okay, here we go. Okay, may I have the count?
217 yes, 5 no, 2 abstentions.
And I will take it that Ms. McNally, Senical, and Johnson will all vote in favor. So it's the vote carries by a majority vote. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And we will see you tomorrow evening.